Michael clapped me on the back, his grin wide and oblivious. "I'm so glad you came, man." I smiled back, of course. Wouldn't miss it for the world. He had no idea, I knew. The champagne glasses sparkled under the dim glow of the chandeliers, the soft hum of classical music weaving through the grand ballroom. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between elegantly dressed guests, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres and top-shelf liquor. The engagement party was everything Michael had wanted: luxurious, extravagant, and most of all, filled with people who admired him. He thrived on admiration, craved the spotlight like oxygen. I stood near the bar, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, watching. The laughter, the toasts, the whispered congratulations. It was all a carefully orchestrated performance. And Michael, the star of the show. He basked in the attention, arm wrapped around Rachel's waist as she beamed at him with the kind of love that made my stomach twist. She didn't know, not yet. I let my gaze sweep over the crowd. Familiar faces, mutual friends, former colleagues, Michael's family. They were all here to celebrate, to witness the happiest moment of his life. They had no idea that tonight, Michael would experience something far more memorable. "Danielle!" Michael's voice cut through my thoughts. He approached with a champagne flute in hand, his expression full of warmth. The sheer audacity of his sincerity almost amused me. "Almost. You don't know how much it means to me that you came," he said, his voice thick with sentiment. "I know things have been a little weird between us lately, but man, this just proves that nothing can come between us." I lifted my glass, forcing a chuckle. "Yeah, nothing at all." He didn't notice the way my grip tightened. Rachel joined us, her soft blue dress flowing around her like a dream. She looked breathtaking, innocent, kind, undeserving of the humiliation that would soon rain down upon her. She looped her arm through Michael's, her smile radiant. "Daniel, I was just telling Michael how glad I am that you're here," she said. "You're his best friend. It wouldn't feel right without you." "Best friend?" Michael's fingers curled around her waist, his thumb stroking the fabric of her dress. The same way his hands had once roamed my girlfriend's body. A deep, burning calm settled inside me. "Wouldn't miss it," I repeated smoothly. A chime rang through the room as a waiter tapped a knife against his glass. The signal. The moment had arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host called, his voice rich with excitement, "let's raise our glasses to the soon-to-be newlyweds, Michael and Rachel." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd as champagne flutes lifted. I felt Michael's eyes on me, expectant, waiting. I stepped forward, raising my glass. "To Michael," I said, my voice steady. "A man so loyal he could never betray anyone." I let the pause stretch. Let the silence settle. Let the first ripple of confusion spread through the room. Then, I smiled. Oh wait. The moment stretched, thick with silence. Every head turned toward me, their smiles frozen mid-toed. Glasses hovered in the air, some halfway to lips, others clutched a little too tightly. The room was poised on the edge of something they didn't yet understand. Michael's grin faltered. "Wait, what?" he chuckled, his laughter slightly forced. "What are you talking about, man?" Rachel's brows knitted together as she turned to him. "Michael?" I swirled my champagne leisurely, savoring the way his face tensed. The arrogance that usually clung to him like cologne began to slip. He wasn't used to feeling out of control. That was the thing about Michael. He lived his life as if the world was his playground, like people were just pieces on a board he could move as he pleased. Not tonight. I took my time, let the anticipation build like a held breath. Then, slowly, I pulled my phone from my pocket, flipping the screen to life with a single tap. The room shimmered with reflections of the chandelier above, but my phone's glow was the only thing Michael saw now. A few curious whispers rustled through the crowd. "Daniel," Michael's voice dropped lower. "What are you doing?" I turned the screen toward Rachel first. "Reading material," I murmured. "Thought you might be interested." She hesitated before looking down. Her eyes scanned the screen, confusion flickering first, then horror. The blood drained from her face so quickly that for a second I thought she might faint. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Michael lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone from my grip, but I was faster. I stepped back, keeping my movements relaxed, controlled. Now, I chided. "You wouldn't want to ruin your own party, would you?" "Shut up," he hissed. "This isn't the time." But it was. It was exactly the time. I turned my gaze to the guests, who were watching with wide, expectant eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying easily across the grand room, I just wanted to make sure everyone here knows exactly what kind of man we're celebrating tonight. A man so devoted, so honorable, that he spent months sneaking around with his best friend's girlfriend. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "No way." A woman clutched her pearls. Actually clutched her pearls, like this was some kind of soap opera. Rachel, still staring at my phone, swayed slightly on her feet. Her breathing had turned shallow, erratic. "Tell me this isn't real," she whispered, voice barely audible. Michael's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "Rachel, listen, I can explain." "Explain?" She jerked away from him, her voice rising in a mix of disbelief and fury. "Explain!" I took pity on her. "A little. You don't need to hear his excuses, Rachel." I tapped the screen again, letting a series of images fill the space between us. Screenshots of texts, timestamps, hotel receipts, pictures. Undeniable proof. Her entire body stiffened. The color was gone from her face. Then she did the one thing I'd been waiting for. She turned and slapped him, hard. A sharp crack echoed through the room. A murmur of shock swept through the crowd. Michael stumbled back, blinking. "Rachel, you disgusting, lying bastard!" she shrieked, her voice sharp with rage. "How could you?" The entire room was watching now, transfixed, caught in the gravitational pull of the disaster unfolding before them. Michael turned back to me, eyes blazing. "You set this up," he spat. "You planned this whole damn thing." I smiled. "Of course I did." Michael's face twisted, his usual cocky confidence nowhere to be found. His hand hovered near his cheek where Rachel's slap had left a bright red mark. He looked between her, me, and the stunned crowd, scrambling for something, anything, to regain control. "Rachel, please," he started, reaching for her, but she took a step back, so sharply that her heel nearly caught on the floor. "Don't," she snapped, her voice shaking. "Don't even try." Michael turned to me, anger now overtaking his shock. "You," he growled, pointing a finger at my chest. "You had this plan the whole damn time. You could have just come to me, like a man." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "Like a man?" I repeated. "You mean the way you came to me? By sneaking around with my girlfriend behind my back? By lying to my face?" Rachel let out a sharp breath, her hands trembling as she wiped at her cheeks. "How long, Michael?" she demanded. "How long has this been going on?" He swallowed hard, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "Rachel, I swear, it didn't mean..." "How long?" Michael hesitated. That was his mistake. The hesitation alone told Rachel everything she needed to know. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice cracking. "It wasn't just a fling." I watched as the realization hit her fully, like a slow-moving wreck she couldn't stop. This wasn't just betrayal. It was months of deceit. Lies. Nights spent in bed with him, while she believed she was in love with someone faithful. A murmur ran through the crowd. Hushed voices whispering, guests exchanging looks. A few of Michael's business partners were standing near the back, suddenly looking very interested in their drinks. Some of Rachel's family members were staring at him with barely concealed disgust. The moment of reckoning was here. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I wasn't sure if I'd need this," I said lightly, turning it over in my hands. "But seeing as Michael loves surprises..." His eyes darkened. "What the hell is that?" "Well, don't you open it and find out?" He hesitated. For the first time all night, I saw something close to fear in his expression. Rachel snatched it from my hands before he could. With shaking fingers, she tore the flap open, pulling out the crisp sheets of paper inside. Her eyes scanned the contents. The blood drained from her face. "What is this?" she whispered. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough for Michael to hear. "The lease to the apartment he's been renting under a fake name," I murmured. "The one he's been using for his affairs." Rachel inhaled sharply, then shoved the papers into Michael's chest. "I was engaged to you," she shouted. "And you've been sleeping around this entire time?" Michael fumbled with the papers, trying to explain, but it was over. Rachel turned to me, eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, she tore the ring off her finger and threw it at Michael's feet. The party was over. The diamond ring hit the floor with a soft clink, spinning in a slow, aimless circle before coming to a stop. The room was utterly silent. Every guest, every friend, every family member stood frozen, caught in the wreckage of Michael's shattered facade. Rachel's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, her eyes shining with the sting of betrayal. Michael just stood there, his mouth slightly open, his face pale. He was scrambling, I could see it, the gears in his head turning frantically, trying to figure out a way to spin this, to talk his way out. But there was no way out. "You lied to me," Rachel whispered almost to herself. "I built my life around you. I trusted you." She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "God, I defended you." Michael reached for her again, but she stepped back, raising her hands as if his touch might burn her. "Rachel, come on. This isn't what it looks like." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said. "Should I read the texts out loud for everyone? Maybe describe the photos?" Michael spun toward me, his jaw tightening, his face darkening with rage. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. I tilted my head. "You think I'm the one making a joke of your engagement?" A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. Michael's parents were watching from the edge of the room, his father looking furious, his mother shaking her head in quiet shame. Some of his co-workers whispered among themselves, already piecing together how this might affect his reputation. "You set this up," Michael spat, his voice low and seething. "You planned this whole night just to humiliate me." I shrugged. "I just did what any good friend would do, gave you the moment of attention you love so much." Rachel inhaled sharply, then turned to Michael again, her voice raw. "Tell me, who else?" Michael hesitated, and in that split second, she knew. Rachel let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "And to think I spent years believing you were the man I was going to marry." Her voice cracked on the last word, and that was it, her final straw. She turned on her heel and walked away, her hands shaking as she pushed past stunned guests. "Rachel, wait!" Michael lunged after her, but I stepped into his path. "Not tonight," I murmured, shaking my head. He exhaled sharply, his fists clenching. "You think you've won? You think this makes you better than me?" I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "I don't need to be better than you, Michael. I just needed to make sure you got exactly what you deserved." He stared at me, breathing hard, his face burning with humiliation. The engagement party was over. And Michael? He was finally, completely alone. Michael stood there, his jaw tight, his fists curled at his sides. The weight of the moment had finally sunk in. His engagement was over, his reputation in ruins, and the eyes of every guest bore into him like daggers. He had always thrived on attention, but now it was suffocating. This wasn't the admiration he was used to. This was scrutiny, judgment, and worst of all, I could see the battle playing out in his head. Should he lash out? Should he try to salvage his dignity? Should he walk away and pretend none of this mattered? Instead, he did what cowards always do when they're exposed. He turned on me. "You're pathetic, you know that?" He spat, his voice raw with anger. "You couldn't handle losing her, so you had to take me down with you." I gave him a slow, measured smile. "Losing her? Oh no, Michael, you lost. And not just Rachel." His nostrils flared as he took a step closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You think this changes anything? You think you're some kind of hero?" He let out a humorless laugh. "You're just as bitter and miserable as I always knew you'd be." I tilted my head, studying him. "You sound upset, Michael, almost like this wasn't part of your plan," he sneered. "You ruined my engagement, but let's be honest. Rachel would have found out eventually. I would have moved on. I always do." I nodded. "You're right, but I didn't just ruin your engagement." I slipped my phone from my pocket again, this time pulling up a different set of messages, ones that had nothing to do with Rachel. Michael frowned. "What the hell is that?" "Your business partners," I said, turning the screen toward him. "You remember them, don't you? The ones who trusted you?" His face darkened. I scrolled through email exchanges, text messages, bank transfers, evidence of his little side deals, the money he'd skimmed, the under-the-table transactions he thought were hidden. Michael always thought he was untouchable. He was about to find out otherwise. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I smiled. "I told you, Michael. I've known for a long time, and while I was waiting for this moment, I figured I'd dig a little deeper. Turns out, you weren't just betraying Rachel, you were betraying everyone." His face drained of color. Somewhere in the crowd, I saw his boss watching, his expression unreadable. A few of his colleagues had pulled out their phones, scrolling through messages. They were seeing it, seeing the cracks in Michael's image, the undeniable proof that he wasn't just an unfaithful fiancé, he was a fraud. "You son of a bitch," he whispered. I leaned in. "You should have picked a different man to betray, Michael. Someone who wouldn't make sure you lost everything. Rahel reappeared then, her face red and blotchy from tears, but her posture straight, composed. She looked at Michael like she had never really seen him before. "Don't contact me," she said, voice hollow. "Don't call, don't text, don't even think about apologizing. You're dead to me." Michael opened his mouth, but she turned on her heel before he could get a word out. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor was the only sound in the room. She walked to her parents, who immediately wrapped their arms around her. Guests began murmuring, the energy in the room shifting. The celebration was over. The only thing left was wreckage. Michael turned to me one last time. His eyes, which had once been so smug, were filled with pure hatred. "You think you won?" I sipped my champagne. "Oh, I know I did." Then I turned and walked away, leaving him in the ruins of his own making.